Laurie Burt.
Unlike the honourable member for Shipley, I'm very proud of our coalition for sticking to the 0.7% aid target.
The honourable lady's question must be heard. People shouldn't jeer before they've heard. Laurie Burt.
Speaker, we set an example to the world, and later on this month the Prime Minister goes to Bali to co-chair the high-level panel to discuss the next set of Millennium Development Goals. Will he use his leadership to press for a standalone goal on gender equality and women's empowerment?
Well, I will look very carefully at what the honourable lady says about the importance of gender equality in terms of the new Millennium Development Goals. The point I would make to anyone who raises the issue about our aid commitment is I don't think we should break our promises to the poorest people in the world. And when you think about it, our key aim ought to be to eradicate the extreme poverty people sometimes still face, living on less than $1.25 a day. That is what we're talking about, and I think we should be proud of the fact we're keeping our promises.
Diana Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, as a money-saving tip on Budget Day, and in line with what the Education Secretary wants for teachers, could the Prime Minister put his Chancellor and the Cabinet on performance-related pay? And how much does he think it would save?
It is this Chancellor that has seen the deficit come down by a third since he became Chancellor and has seen over 1 million private sector jobs. He is getting the country out of the hole that we were left in by the party opposite.
Mr. Richard Fuller.
Speaker, will the Prime Minister welcome the successful launch in Bedford last week of the country's first local enterprise fund, where people who care about Bedford have raised £400,000 to invest in business in Bedford, encouraging enterprise and securing employment? And will he agree with me that in this respect, as in so many others, where Bedford leads, the rest of the country should follow?
I'm sure my honourable friend is right about Bedford's leadership in all things, but he makes an important point, which is we do need to see more small businesses start, more enterprise, and we have seen in Britain over the last 3 years the fastest rate of new business creation in our history, but we need to see more of it to keep the private sector going.
Alex Cunningham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Rising unemployment remains an issue in my Stockton North constituency. It's unemployment and recession which grinds hard-working families and the most vulnerable into the ground, a price worth paying for next month's obscene tax cut for millionaires.
If the honourable gentleman actually looks at the figures today, he'll see that there are 131,000 more people in work over the last quarter. We've seen 600,000 more people employed compared with a year ago. That is what is actually happening in terms of employment. And I have to say, when we look at the mess we were left by the party opposite, being given advice on economics on Budget Day from the party opposite is like asking Enron for accountancy advice.
Marcus Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In less than a fortnight's time, this government will have taken 3,168 of my constituents out of paying income tax altogether. Does this not show that this Conservative-led government are on the side of hard-working, low-paid people?
Well, I think my honourable friend makes an important point, is that we have consistently lifted the personal tax allowance, the amount of money that you earn before you start paying tax, starting at around £6,000 and now rising all the time. So over 2 million people have already been taken out of tax altogether. And if he's sitting comfortably for the next half an hour, he may have some further news.
Bridget Phillipson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree with his honourable friend, the member for Hexham, that his government's focus should be on looking after people who are struggling to pay their mortgages rather than protecting those in £2 million houses?
Well, we should be helping people who are paying their mortgages, and that is why it's so vital that we stick to our plans, because we have low interest rates in this country, because we have a plan to get the deficit down. That is absolutely key. The other point I would make to the honourable lady is, if you look at the funding for lending scheme from the Bank of England, that has now successfully reduced mortgage rates, and it's also made sure that people who don't have access to a large deposit are able to look at buying a house. We are making progress, but there's a lot more to do.
Gavin Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This month, we have had the wonderful news that Jaguar Land Rover are going to create a further 700 jobs in South Staffordshire, bringing their total investment to over £500 million. Last year, we saw the creation of 70,000 manufacturing jobs in the UK. Does my right honourable friend not think this is stark contrast to the 1.7 million manufacturing jobs destroyed under the last Labour government?
My honourable friend makes an important point. Jaguar Land Rover has been a massive success story for our country, and I would praise all of those who have invested money in that business, and all those who work in that business, and all the apprenticeships who are being trained in that business. It is part of a recovery of our automotive sector that has, for the first time in 30 years, seen a surplus in the number of cars that we export overseas, and is part of a picture where Nissan, Toyota, Honda, other automotive businesses in this sector are doing well, and we support them.
Tom Greatrix.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware that this week marks the bicentenary of the birth of Dr. David Livingstone, born in Blantyre, my constituency, buried in Westminster Abbey, marked by a service attended by President Joyce Banda last night in the Abbey. He will know that one of Livingstone's proudest achievements was the drive to abolish slavery in East Africa. Given the bicentenary, does the Prime Minister agree with me that it's a time for his government to now take the lead to end the scandal of the 2.5 million people in modern-day slavery or prostitution as a result of people trafficking?
I think the honourable gentleman makes an important point, and it gives me the opportunity to praise President Banda for her work and for what she's doing to lift people out of poverty in Malawi, and to thank her for visiting Britain and for visiting Scotland this week. I think he makes an important point about slavery, because there is still modern-day slavery, and we still need to take action in order to combat it, and that is action at a European level, action at a national level, and at a local level with the police, and this government will continue to take that action.
Duncan Hames.
Whatever further changes the Chancellor announces today, next month pay slips of millions of ordinary working people will show a tax cut from the personal allowance rise Liberal Democrats called for. The largest single change to income tax in this Parliament. What does this say about the priorities of his coalition government?
Well, this is an important priority that we have taken action on in budget after budget, even in difficult times, saying to people, we are on your side, we want to cut your tax bills, and in just 2 weeks' time there will be a tax cut of over £200 for 24 million people in our country, each and every taxpayer, and at the same time lifting over 2 million people out of tax so they don't pay any income tax at all. It is real progress, and it's on the side of people who work hard and want to get on.
Gloria De Piero.
What is the Prime Minister planning to spend his millionaire's tax cut on?
The point I make to the honourable lady is that when the top rate of tax was put up, millionaires paid £7 billion less. That is the sort of incompetence and inefficiency that she left the sofa of GMTV to support.
Order, the question is asked. Members shouldn't shout their heads off when the Prime Minister is giving an answer. Dr. Julian Lewis.
Given that SAS Sergeant Danny Nightingale has had his conviction quashed following the quashing of his military prison sentence last year, does the Prime Minister agree with me that it would be totally against the public interest and against the interests of the SAS regiment for him to have to face a fresh trial when others are benefiting from the weapons amnesty rightly introduced by the Secretary of State for Defence as a result of the Nightingale case?
Well, my honourable friend raises an important point, and let me say how strongly I support all of those who serve in our special forces. You get the privilege as Prime Minister of meeting many of these brave people and seeing they are some of the finest and most courageous people in our country. But I don't want to get in any trouble with my right honourable friend, the Attorney General, so I'll leave the issues for the courts to the courts.
Hugh Bailey.
Money the government has set aside to help people who are hit by the bedroom tax won't cover a fraction of the really hard cases, like that of my paralysed constituent who receives round-the-clock care from his wife. There's an acute housing shortage in York and they have nowhere to move to. So will the Prime Minister do one more U-turn on the bedroom tax and scrap it altogether?
Well, first of all, let me just remind the honourable gentleman that only the Labour Party could call a welfare reform a tax. It shows how little they understand about how tax and benefit actually work. What we are doing is making available a discretionary fund, which is there for the hard cases, but recognising there's a basic issue of cost, about 23 billion spent on housing benefit every year, and there's a basic issue of fairness. Not just fairness between the private sector and the social sector, but also recognising there are 1.8 million people on housing waiting lists who would love to have a bedroom.
Mr. Ian Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is my right honourable friend aware that the Business Location Index has just voted Milton Keynes as the best place in the country to do business? And with over 2,000 business startups in the last year, it is Milton Keynes that is rebuilding our economy.
No, well, I was aware of that statistic because he helpfully reminded me of it when we were in Milton Keynes together very recently, talking about exactly this issue, what a fantastic location for business it is, how it is encouraging business startups, and it is leading to a growth in employment in that region.
Hold.
Speaker, given that the Chancellor has this morning joined Twitter, could the Prime Minister remind the Chancellor and the House what too many tweets make?
I've made a number of remarks about Twitter over the years, most of which I've had to withdraw because I am now tweeting myself. But I look forward to the first tweet after the budget this afternoon. But what is clear is he could tweet even now that we are cutting taxes in 2 weeks' time for 24 million working people, taking 2 million people out of tax. And certainly tweeting that would not cause any dangers for him.
Shailesh Vara.
Recently, the Shadow Home Secretary admitted that when Labour were in government, they got their immigration policy wrong. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that across the breakfast table, she should persuade her husband to make a similar admission as far as Labour's economic policy is concerned?
I think my honourable friend makes a very good point. We inherited a complete shambles when it came to immigration, a system completely out of control. But we still have, and we've had apologies, or sort of apologies for that. What we haven't had is any sort of apology for the borrowing, the spending and the debt for the mess that we were left in by the party opposite.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been estimated that for the cost of just one nuclear reactor, 7 million households could be lifted out of fuel poverty through energy efficiency and conservation. Hinkley is expected to come with an eye-watering £14 billion price tag and a strike price getting on for double the price of current electricity. If that doesn't make nuclear unaffordable, can the Prime Minister tell us what would?
Well, I'm afraid I just don't agree with the honourable lady. Our fleet of nuclear power stations are coming to the end of their life, and I think it's very important that we work hard to replace some of that capacity. That is what Hinkley is about. That is why I think my right honourable friend was absolutely right to give it the go-ahead, and I think it's going to be an important provider of carbon-free electricity in the years ahead.
Order.
That brings Prime Minister's questions to a close. Some procedural changes now because it is
on budget day, and in line with what the Education Secretary wants for teachers, could the Prime Minister put his Chancellor and the Cabinet on performance-related pay? And how much does he think it would save?
It is this Chancellor that has seen the deficit come down by a third since he became Chancellor and has seen over 1 million private sector jobs. He is getting the country out of the hole that we were left in.
Laurie Burt.
Unlike the honourable member for Shipley, I'm very proud of our coalition for sticking to the 0.7% aid target.
The honourable lady's question must be heard. People shouldn't jeer before they've heard. Laurie Burt.
Speaker, We set an example to the world, and later on this month, the Prime Minister goes...
The point I would make to anyone who raises the issue about our aid commitment is I don't think we should break our promises to the poorest people in the world. And when you think about it, our key aim ought to be to eradicate the extreme poverty people sometimes still face, living on less than $1.25 a day. That is what we're talking about, and I think we should be proud of the fact we're keeping our promises.
Diana Johnson.
Mr Speaker, as a money-saving tip,
to Bali to co-chair the high-level panel to discuss the next set of Millennium Development Goals. Will he use his leadership to press for a standalone goal on gender equality and women's empowerment?
Well, I will look very carefully at what the Honourable Lady says about the importance of gender equality in terms of the new Millennium Development Goals. Left in by the party opposite.
Mr. Richard Fuller.
Speaker, will the Prime Minister welcome the successful launch in Bedford last week of the country's first local enterprise fund, where people who care about Bedford have raised £400,000 to invest in businesses in Bedford, encouraging enterprise and securing employment? And will he agree with me that in this respect, as in so